Greetings, I am the Red Prometheus, and welcome to my channel. There comes a time in every life, and indeed in every civilization, when infancy must give way to adulthood. A child reacts to the world, accepting its pains and pleasures as external forces, without comprehension of cause or control. Primitive peoples, too, once bowed before nature's unpredictable whims, shrugging at famine or plague as unavoidable fate, convinced the world was governed by capricious, uncontrollable forces. Yet humanity has since harnessed the atom, split the sky, reshaped continents, and dared to dream of mastery over its environment. This monumental progress, this undeniable ascent of human capability, demands a commensurate growth in collective responsibility. It demands that we, as a species, claim full agency over our collective destiny. Why then, when catastrophe strikes on a societal scale, when entire nations collapse into misery and hunger, when preventable diseases decimate populations, when economic crises shatter lives, or when ecological disasters threaten our very existence, why do we still shrug, still defer, still act like infants? Why do we hear, "That's the market, that's nature, no one could have known," and allow no one to be punished, no one to be truly responsible? This is not adulthood, this is not civilization, this is cowardice disguised as pragmatism. The central point of this video, and indeed of this entire essay, is to address the common pervasive talking point, that communism is solely and uniquely responsible for 100 million deaths. This grim tally is delivered with moralistic fervor, often used to condemn the entire system. But what is consistently ignored is the fundamental asymmetry of blame. When communism fails, we identify human agents, we demand names, and accountability, however brutal, is structurally embedded. Yet when capitalism fails, when people starve, go homeless, lose their jobs, or die from preventable causes, culpability vanishes into a fog of euphemism. It's blame on abstract external causes, the unpredictable market, the uncontrollable climate, or simply nature's indifference. This is intellectually dishonest. I seek to expose this profound unfairness and reframe the discussion in terms of maturity, agency, and accountability, not only for individuals, but for humanity as a species. The question is clear. If communism is symmetrically responsible for its tragedies, why isn't capitalism held to the same standard for its failures? This question of systemic agency is at the very core of our inquiry. Consider Jordan Peterson and others like him, who tirelessly promote personal responsibility. Clean your room, they urge. Stand up straight. Fix yourself before fixing the world. On the surface, these are admirable principles. They speak to discipline, order, and the masculine stoic virtues. And I agree, we should indeed own our circumstances and act decisively within them. But real maturity goes further. It imposes itself on the world. Cleaning a room is not merely about tidiness. It is about asserting agency. If your room is the state, then cleaning it means confronting its dysfunction. If your room is the economic order, then cleaning it means fixing capitalism. Yet Peterson and the classical liberals stop short. They praise personal stoicism but ridicule collective action. They frame political critique as weakness, as blame shifting, as an avoidance of individual duty. This is cowardice disguised as maturity. This systemic abdication is precisely what allows capitalism to escape the scrutiny and accountability it so desperately avoids. Capitalism survives not because it is inherently efficient or just, but because men have become too polite to confront it, too conflict avoidant, too afraid to inconvenience others. These popular apologists, unlike the elites who are far more conscious of this fact, benefit from keeping us in this infantile state, where we accept the system's failures as unavoidable. They are the ideological gatekeepers, ensuring that the public remains convinced of the market's mystical infallibility, thus shielding the true power brokers from any form of accountability. Let us be clear. I am not speaking of systemic injustice in the liberal, victimist sense. There will be no talk of privilege, reparations, or equity. That is not the register I operate on. My true concern is systemic dysfunctionality, and the deliberate obfuscation of responsibility for it. The free market is treated like a force of nature, unpredictable, ungovernable, beyond human control. But this is a lie. It is a structure made by human beings, consciously designed, consciously maintained. We are responsible for it. Its failures are our failures. Capitalist ideology convinces us to abdicate this responsibility. Let the markets decide. Let the invisible hand guide. Let the experts or elites handle it. This is the modern disease. We choose to be governed by ghosts, by abstractions, so we can avoid hard decisions and preserve our comfortable illusions. The capitalist state, by stark contrast, is an instrument of elites. It maintains a facade of neutrality, presenting itself as a mere referee of the free market, but its primary function is to enforce elite will and uphold the existing class structure. It is not passive. It is actively shaped by capital to enforce private property rights, uphold contracts, suppress labor dissent, and protect corporate interests at home and abroad. The free market is thus a mirage, a rhetorical device to justify the existing power balance and disguise the reality of consolidated power. In truth, markets always consolidate due to the inherent logic of capital accumulation, and the state becomes an appendage of monopoly capital, not the other way around, ensuring that the people are always the ones who lose, bearing the cost of austerity, inflation, unemployment, and endless wars fought for corporate interests. This systemic abdication of responsibility is the core of its dysfunction. I reject both the feminine resentful dependence of liberal identity politics and the cowardly passive individualism of capitalist liberalism. What is needed is masculine communism, personal accountability, yes, but fused with collective authority, a return to stewardship, ruling, shaping, constructing, not whining for help, not begging for equality, commanding the ship. I am not against order or discipline. I am against the wrong men commanding it. I call for a society where power is held accountably, not abstractly. Responsibility is shared vertically, from the top to the base, like a fractal. Everyone from clerk to chairman is answerable for their post. In this communist vision, the state is conceived as a tool for the people, an instrument of collective mastery. It centralizes economic planning and executive command, establishing a visible, traceable chain of command from central ministers down to local enterprises and collective farms. This means that every major decision is an intentional act of policy. When something fails, it is a failure of the plan, and thus a failure with a human author. Responsibility is structurally embedded within this consciously directed system. The state, in theory and often in practice, claims ownership of all outcomes, positive and negative, because it asserts direct control over the levers of society. The communist economy, inherently communitarian and collectivist, creates an environment of collective ownership of both successes and failures, with the state serving as a tool for the people's ownership of production. This collectivist logic is fundamental. It creates an environment where the entire system is expected to work according to conscious design. And when it doesn't, the failure has a human author, not some abstract force, a stark contrast to capitalism's convenient abdication. Let us revisit the Holodomor, a tragedy often used as the primary indictment against communism, contributing to that 100 million deaths tally. It was a profound catastrophe, caused by overlapping factors, severe droughts and environmental stressors, coupled with corruption, incompetence, and overzealous requisitioning by local officials. It was not a genocide, and it was not uniquely Ukrainian. Famines also struck Kazakhstan, Siberia, and other parts of USSR. Crucially, Stalin's state acknowledged the catastrophe. Those responsible were held to account, investigated, tried, sometimes executed. Complaints were formally heard in public forums, and Stalin himself encouraged bottom-up criticism and reports of misconduct. This was a brutal form of accountability, but it was accountability nonetheless. The Great Purge, while tragic in its excesses and often indiscriminate, served a strategic function to clear out entrenched interests, careerist and bureaucratic saboteurs from the party, state, military, and NKVD itself. If you were hoarding grain, if you were corrupt, if your mismanagement led to hunger, or if you were simply complacent and inefficient, you were executed. This was not merely cruelty, it was adulthood. It was the principle that in a system where the people own the state, maladministration is a treason against the collective, and treason deserves punishment. The 1936 Soviet Constitution, often dismissed by liberal critics as paper fiction in a totalitarian state, was in fact a radical legal foundation for democratizing state power. It enshrined universal suffrage, direct elections at every level, and extensive social rights, granting the people legal instruments to hold the state accountable and reinforcing the notion of the state as a tool for the people, not its master. Stalin, in this light, was the prototype of the Red Monarch. one who reigns not by detachment but by supreme and vigilant intervention, embodying the authority of the people and punishing those who misused delegated power. He was the executor of the collective will, the sword against the corrupt, and the living personification of the revolution's sovereignty. This is why Stalin was the perfect example of my monarcho-communism, the perfect Red Tsar, holding people accountable. Now, let's consider the stark contrast with capitalist famines, where the 100 million deaths argument conveniently falls silent. Ireland, 1845 to 52, a million dead, another million fled, while grain continued to be exported from the starving island by the colonial power. Charles Trevelyan, a British official, infamously stated that the famine was a God's way of correcting the Irish. No one was punished, the system was upheld, and the empire went on, demonstrating a profound lack of accountability. Austria-Hungary, in the Galicia, across early 1900s, endemic seasonal famines in a region intentionally kept underdeveloped, with no aid or reform from the imperial court. These peasants were considered expendable. India, multiple famines under British rule, massive death tolls under laissez-faire misrule, where millions perished while resources were extracted. The fundamental difference is this: communism owns its failures, capitalism denies them. Capitalism naturalizes death, dismissing it as unavoidable, market fluctuation, or crop failure. No one is punished, no one reforms, no one even apologizes. This is not whataboutism. It's a call for symmetrical judgment. If communism is judged by its failures, then so must capitalism. And when judged verily, communism at least acknowledged its failure, brutally, violently, but sincerely. Capitalism hides its failures in a fog of statistical euphemism and providential platitudes, precisely to avoid the uncomfortable truth of its own systemic agency in human suffering. Where is the death toll of capitalism? You won't find it explicitly attributed in the mainstream narrative. Instead, when a famine or any other tragedy happens under capitalism, they don't say it was caused by capitalist mismanagement. They say it was a force of nature or some other cause outside of capitalism. What do you call it when 30,000 children starve every day while vast quantities of food are burned, dumped, or discarded to keep prices artificially high, simply to maintain market equilibrium and corporate profits? What do you call it when millions lack access to life-saving healthcare, not because the knowledge or resources don't exist, but because treatment is less profitable than managing chronic illness? Or when pharmaceutical companies prioritize exorbitant pricing over global health crises, leaving entire populations vulnerable? What do you call it when preventable industrial accidents claim lives due to neglected safety protocols, or when entire cities flood due to crumbling, underfunded infrastructure, all because profit motives superseded public safety and long-term maintenance? What do you call it when millions work themselves to death in precarious jobs for products they cannot afford, for homes they'll never own, dying from stress, exhaustion, or lack of basic necessities, while a tiny elite accumulates unimaginable wealth? You call it capitalism, and its dead are counted too, just not with the same moral outrage, because in capitalism no one is responsible. The system is designed to diffuse blame, to obfuscate causality, and to present its failures as inevitable forces of nature, rather than direct consequences of its inherent logic and the conscious decisions of its beneficiaries. It is a pathetic stance. If there are failures under communism, the management, the people responsible, are held accountable. If something happens under capitalism, all responsibility for a catastrophe is just nobody's. So what does it say about them? Does it mean they're powerless against the forces of nature? Shouldn't it be the goal and power of society to take mastery of its environment, meaning they are responsible for both success in taming nature and flourishing because of that, and the negative consequences of failure to do so? But in capitalism, there is no such authority or responsibility. Isn't that pathetic? Maturity is not passivity. It is not the polite resignation. Maturity is grasping the world and shaping it. The masculine communist view is not utopian. It is post-infantile. It accepts the world as it is, and it moves against it. It embraces suffering not as limit, but as terrain to conquer. Civilization cannot be built on people pleasers and doormats. It must be built by those who can say, this is unacceptable, and I will fix it. We must outgrow the comfortable lie that someone else is in charge. No one else is, and no one is coming to fix it. We, as humanity, need to grow past our infantile passivity and this passive response to external stimuli, like a baby that accepts everything done to it, or like the primitive people who had to shrug and go along with the forces of nature they had no way of predicting, understanding, or controlling. We as humanity need to grow up, evolve, leave the comfort of relinquished authority. We need to be agents of our own destiny. I see this as a kind of cosmic fist grasping at reality, not merely observing it. We are the lords of it now. We rule our reality, and so we cannot leave any part of it to some random chance, to some abstract market force, or to the whims of an invisible hand. We need to be accountable and responsible for every aspect of our collective existence. If Jordan Peterson is right to say clean your room, then it follows clean your state, clean your economy, clean your reality. This is not grievance, it is duty. If capitalism continues its destructive path, it is only because men have failed to assert themselves. The world we live in now is not the result of immutable law, but of the sins of our forefathers who lacked the will to act. Action is maturity. Responsibility is sovereignty. Mark Fisher's incisive critique of capitalist realism highlights precisely how capitalism naturalizes itself by denying alternatives and mystifying its failures, treating suffering as an inevitable, depoliticized aspect of its existence. It tells us there is no alternative, trapping us in a cycle of passive acceptance and a cognitive cage where the very idea of systemic change becomes unthinkable. This ideological maneuver effectively disarms any collective will to transform society. We stand at a crossroads facing two paths. One is capitalism, a path of continued childishness, abdicated responsibility, and the continued preventable death. It is a system that rules everything but takes responsibility for nothing, claiming freedom while enforcing submission to an unaccountable power and mystical market forces. It is a system that protects the powerful by obscuring their culpability, ensuring that the burden of its failures falls squarely on the shoulders of the innocent, the vulnerable, and the exploited. This path offers only perpetual infancy, a controllable cage where the illusion of individual choice masks the reality of systemic control. And the other path is communism, a path of maturity, accountability, and ownership of fate. It is a system where the state is owned by the people, where authority is earned through responsibility and demonstrated competence, where justice is real, with material consequences for those who betray the collective. It is not merely about choosing an economic model, it is about humanity's cosmic coming of age. It is a fundamental choice between perpetual immaturity and the courageous embrace of our collective destiny. We must embrace real agency, not just individual, but collective, recognizing that our power is greatest when unified and directed. We must rule our destiny, or remain forever ruled by abstractions and the self-serving narratives of those who profit from our collective infancy. We seize the world. We take it in our hand, not as beggars, but as masters. We take responsibility, and we make it pay for every death it caused in silence. That is adulthood. That is justice. That is communism. And remember, the chains remain, but the flame spreads. Thank you for listening.